Hey guys, Mark Allen, BHSpringSolutions LLC and BHSpringSolutions.com, and subject of this video is the 10 different components and 11 different causes or causative factors of extraction problems in the Browning high power and the high power clones. And this has become a much more topical subject in 2019, mostly because we think the high power pistols that are in use are definitely getting older. There's lots of 20, 30, 40, 50-year-old high power pistols that are in use, and the older these pistols get, and when you see the components and the causative factors of extraction problems in the high power design, you'll start to understand why, as these pistols get older, this problem gets more widespread. The other reason is because in 2019, many months this year, the high power pistol, the Browning high power pistol, has been the sales leader of used handguns on gunbroker.com. And you might raise your eyebrows, but of all the pistols to lead sales, the high power pistol, really? Well, that was kind of my reaction, but it wasn't really a surprise. The design is virtually as timeless as the 1911, and it's been used in more countries by military and police than any other handgun, I believe, in history, or at least it held the record for a long time, 93 different countries. And there's good availability of these handguns. And when everything is fresh in a Browning high power, like when a Browning high power is new, my 1989 model that I've got nearly 30,000 rounds through today literally went almost 20 years and 10,000 rounds without a stoppage, regardless of what I fed this thing, regardless of what kind of shooting it was. All kinds of different ammunition, whatever I could buy, it cycled everything. And it seemed like this thing was just, it was almost impossible to make this thing malfunction. Then one day, I started having a lot of failures to extract. And of course, this sent me on a search for, well, why is this all of a sudden happening? And in that case, it was an extractor spring. That's a common thing in the high power pistol. It is one of the 10 components that we're going to be talking about, but it is only one component. And we're seeing more today combinations of things in high power pistols that are beyond their useful life, or in need of replacement, or in need of tuning, or something that is causing extraction problems in those pistols. I'm going to tell you a quick story. Just this past week, we had a friend of ours, a customer, a BHSpringSolutions customer, who met us at our service center in Shelbyville, Indiana, and he came in with 2 high power pistols. One of those high power pistols was an internal extractor model. We're not going to be demonstrating with internal extractor models today, but he had an internal extractor model, and he started talking about having had failures to extract. And while he was talking, I took his pistol apart. I took a round of ammunition, as I'm going to show you here. I put the cartridge behind the extractor, and I did what I call my shake test, and I started shaking it. And as you can see, I'm shaking things on the table at the other end of the table, but the cartridge is not moving. Now, this is including the weight of a 147 grain bullet. It's a loaded cartridge, obviously, so that's a bit of a disadvantage to a extractor in a shake test. This is what we want to see with the shake test. I did that in front of the friend of ours, and I did that, and the cartridge was just, lobbing up and down, nearly fell off of the extractor completely. The extractor just did not have any hold on the cartridge. If your high power pistol will not pass the shake test, these are an extractor problem, an extraction failure that is very, very likely to happen. What I can say is, after a handgun has come through BHSpringSolutions Service Center, and we do the things that we're going to show you today and cover these bases, we test, and it is extraordinarily rare for us to have any sort of a malfunction. Things work the way that they're supposed to when everything is working the way that it did in the beginning, or better. And that's what we're going to show you today. This is one easy test you can do, and it's all about your extractor and the extractor claw's hold on the cartridge casing. This must be firm. This must be, it must pass the shake test. So that's what that is all about. Things that cause a high power pistol to not pass the shake test. Extractor spring. This is public suspect number one when you have an extraction problem in the high power pistol. Number two is the extractor itself. It is a wear part. I had to change mine in my carry high power, and it was around 15,000 rounds, I think. The extractor's claw is here. This, when it is new, is quite sharp. And the underneath side of the extractor claw is, of course, impeccably clean. It's even shiny when these are new. You need to keep that extractor claw in that kind of condition. The only way to do that is to take it out of your high power occasionally and use a wire brush, not a patch, not a cloth, a wire brush. And wire brush that black stuff that builds up under this extractor. This is not a generous size extractor claw. You need all of it working for you, and it needs to be in good condition as well as you can keep it in that kind of good condition. It cannot be properly cleaned in the pistol. It needs to be removed. This needs a wire brush taken to it, and it needs to be shiny under that extractor claw. Another contributing factor to extractor failures is the ejector. That's the rest of the tandem of the extraction process in the high power, because as your slide recoils rearward with that empty cartridge casing, the extractor's holding it until it runs into the ejector. This again can show as a wear part. What wears? The end of the ejector. It becomes shorter, and we're not talking about lots shorter, we're talking about just a little shorter. And when it does, it causes a late collision of the extracting empty shell casing and the ejector, and if that collision is late, the timing is not perfect, and that can result. So one of the things that I like to do when we replace an extractor in any of our high powers or in any of our friends or customers' high powers, we like to change these two parts out at the same time. It's just, life is better that way. These parts work directly together to accomplish successfully the thing that people experience when they have a failure to extract. So that is another part that can be a contributor, certainly, to extraction problems. We're going to run to a couple of other subjects here. Recoil spring. There's a lot of use today of 18.5-pound recoil springs in the high power for standard pressure ammunition shooting. This goes along with your mainspring. These two work together. What we mean by that is your recoil spring goes in your slide. It is what puts resistance on the slide recoiling rearward and adds the forward push when the slide is going back into battery. And when that happens, it is going to cock the hammer. The slide is. When the hammer is cocked, it's against the resistance of the mainspring or the hammer spring, which is here in your grip frame. These two work together to control the slide cycle rate of your recoil and the recoil of the slide. So a situation where a handgun is oversprung is when the slide is only coming back with enough force in a high power to extract empty shell casings, just lop them out of the gun, a foot away, 2 feet away, and they land on the ground. That's not enough slide cycle rate to successfully extract the empty shell casing. What can happen is what is called short cycling, and that is that, first of all, the slide has slowed too much when you're getting to that collision point, the collision of the casing and the ejector. That happens 3/8 of an inch before full recoil. If it doesn't hit with enough velocity, it may not spit out the empty shell casing. So overspringing the high power. In the case of BHSpringSolutions springs, we have literature in our spring kits. Stay away from 18.5-pound recoil springs unless you are shooting plus P ammunition, which, by the way, was not recommended by the manufacturer of the handgun. But if you happen to do that, protect your investment with that sort of ammunition with an 18.5 pound recoil spring and our buffering recoil spring guide rod, which is further going to protect your frame and your slide. Short cycling, imposters as a fail to extract. So this is one of the reasons, just as an example, why we designed as one of our first product complete spring kits for the high power pistol. And the reason is just replacing one spring here or one spring there, or using an OEM spring here and another company spring there and BH springs in this couple of places, you are asking for malfunctions. And for all kinds more reasons than this video can go into for time's sake. But one example was, I'll tell on myself here, this is many, many years before BHSpringSolutions was born. I purchased, who is now one of our competitors, Recoil Springs, and they sent me a new firing pin spring, and it was an extra power firing pin spring, I think, and is what it was called. And I put that extra power firing pin spring in. I went out to shoot one day, and I had not changed the mainspring, which is what overcomes the firing pin spring, and it had weakened from about 20 years of being installed, and I started having fails to fire because the mainspring was no longer hitting the firing pin with enough force to overcome that big extra power firing pin spring that I had installed that I thought was so cool. We caution against ever replacing out one spring here or one spring there in the high power pistol. The high power pistol is very dependent on springs, and these springs in many cases work together and in conjunction with certain sub-assemblies working with other sub-assemblies, and everything needs to be synchronized, and the way that you do that first and foremost is with the correct springs. So there's an explanation of what happens sometimes with folks who induce fails to extract just simply by using an approach that they don't know is asking for a failure, but certainly, and in BHSpringSolutions universal high power spring kit and all of our spring kits that contain the multiple recoil springs and multiple mainsprings, we have full literature about how the mainspring and recoil springs work together and with different kinds of ammunition. It's designed to help you stay away from practices and combinations that can induce things like a fail to extract. So okay, we've covered how the extractor works, the ejector works, the extractor spring, the recoil spring, the mainspring, how these things contribute. We have some other enemies to high power extraction. One of them is the magazine, and this particular magazine is a problem, and it will and has caused fails to extract. Here is the reason. The presentation of this bullet is too high, and the only way to determine that and to know it is to have a gauge tool that we created. And that is not the profile that we're wanting to see. I'm going to show you one out of one of my carry magazines, and you'll see the difference. The gauge tool wants to see the bullet casing and this angle of the gauge tool. We want these to be parallel. And as you can see, that one is parallel. Here is a new Metgar magazine we just pulled out of the stock today, and we put a round in it, and you can see it also gauges just very, very, very well. Well, if you have one that is presenting like this, it creates too much height on the end of the bullet. That bullet is in the magazine when your slide is trying to drag this empty shell casing back rearward, and it's going to encounter that bullet. And I don't care how hard and how well and how firmly an extractor holds. If it's running an empty shell casing into the face of the next round in the magazine, it's going to fail to extract, and it's going to be very, very common. This particular customer's handgun that came in that I was mentioning that had the extractor that would not pass the shake test. It also came in with a magazine that pretty much was about like that. It was one of the original magazines that came with that pistol, and it was definitely presenting terribly too high. It was another contributor to that customer's experiences of having these what had become rather regular fails to extract. So there was not one contributor in that picture. The extractor was a problem. The magazine that was in use was a problem. That specific high power also introduced us to how the trigger lever, and the trigger return spring can contribute to extraction problems. And this is one that I have to tell you, I didn't even see this coming, but it was quite interesting. And here's what this all was about. Your trigger in your high power pistol, when you pull the trigger lever rises like this. This handgun has the magazine disconnect installed currently. So in the shooting position, the trigger lever is in the rear, and it's going to contact this sear lever right here, which is going to push down the sear lever, which is then going to contact the sear, and the hammer is going to be free to fall forward. Here's the demonstration that we wanted to show you. That is this. And I don't know if we're going to be able to see this trigger lever or not, but it's real important that you see this. This particular customer's trigger, one of the things that was problematic was it literally had lateral movement, and you can see how much lateral movement this has. That's nothing. That's just about normal, and you're not going to get it much less than that. I could move his trigger lever all the way over to here. And so that's not normal. And what that does is this. When you pull the trigger on the high power pistol, the slide cycles literally back and forward before you've had a chance probably to release the trigger. So you have to envision this whole operation happening with that trigger lever up. And in his particular instance, this trigger lever was not affirmatively positioned at all. In other words, it was able to move in its position like this with the trigger pulled. It was able to move and did not come back when I would do this. So what that means is it was sloppy in here. Well, what you're going to notice, if we can see this in the camera, I hope, you see this trigger lever pulled up. If that trigger lever is not staying affirmatively here towards this outer part of the inner wall of the channel where it lives, if it is not staying affirmatively in that position, it is going to encroach on the chamber. It is not even a question. It is going to encroach on the chamber. There is no margin for that trigger lever to have lateral movement this way. So that was another issue with that particular pistol. And this one gets very interesting. This one had an aftermarket trigger. It was an aftermarket trigger, and someone had filed on the trigger stop on the front of the trigger. This is what, if you file that, it will allow the trigger lever to rise higher. Again, if this trigger lever rises higher, it will encroach. And it's not even a question. It creates too much over travel, but the real hazard here is you have a trigger lever that can do nothing except encroach on this chamber. This is your pathway that the bullet needs to both feed into and extract from. And if you have a situation that has created an encroachment into the chamber, you're asking again for malfunctions. So that was the second thing that was going on there. That was, in this case, a trigger being part of the contributor. And finally, the trigger return spring, and this pistol does go back some years. It was like a 1964. And the trigger return spring was literally spent. So the trigger return spring normally is a nice contributor to helping that trigger lever stay out here. It's pressing down when it has downward pressure on it. It naturally, by design, is going to want to stay out here, but his trigger return spring, it was just spent. And all these things together, I'm going to show you something here too. A lot of people kind of miss this with the high power design, but the high power's trigger lever lives like this. When the slide comes back forward, the sear lever pushes this trigger lever this way. When you release the trigger lever comes down and it snaps back and resets. That means this trigger lever is moving. It has metal to metal contact right here with the trigger, and it's a wear part. And as it wears, it will gain its ability to have more lateral movement. And if you combine that with a weak trigger return spring, which encourages it to stay where it needs to stay, these things in combination, and what wears, or what was wearing on that particular pistol, was this this spindle right here that inserts into the trigger. So as it had worn, it started to allow lateral movement. It was no longer affirmatively positioned, and it was in fact prone to encroach into the pathway of the ejecting empty shell casing, or the incoming bullet. So that's how your trigger subassembly parts can be actual contributors to failures to extract. Another one that has come across us many times now is this is a barrel from the TISAS Regent BR9. We tested this one. The chamber is 22 thousandths off center to this position. It moves the cartridge away from the extractor. You can chase an extraction problem all day long. If you have that kind of a defect in a barrel, you're never going to overcome it with anything except a barrel. So that's what caused fails to extract with this particular barrel. We have one right here. This is another, and we're not in the habit of putting down our competition, but this is a rather popular barrel, at least popular being sold, and it's a very budget economy barrel. Among the things that you're going to notice, very, very sharp edges, and I want to compare this to the BHSpringSolutions Advanced Barrel for high power pistols. Very sharp edges here. It creates a very, very tight chamber and a very tight entrance. And what causes the issues with this one is the dimensions of the chamber, the diameter of the chamber is too tight. And after about 25 to 30 rounds of heating up, this starts to get a very tight relationship with the shell casing, and it literally becomes difficult to remove the shell casing from the chamber. And eventually, you know, if your margins or tolerances are not correct, or not where they need to be, that's a real issue. If you have a chamber, this is the BHSpringSolutions barrel. It's not a loose fit, but as you can see, we've got this radiused into the chamber. So naturally, this barrel is going to be, and it's dimensionally correct, this barrel is going to be much less prone. We've tested, you know, up to 250 consecutive rounds without cooling with these barrels, and they don't do that. We've encountered failures to extract in high powers, and it had nothing to do with the extractor. Everything passed every test. Okay, just to summarize real quickly, BHSpringSolutions has the high power 9mm extractor ejector optimization kit that comes with both the hard parts, the ejector and the extractor spring. Also includes a sear lever pin and extractor pin. You're going to have to remove both of those in order to replace an extractor, so those are included in there as well. The BHSpringSolutions, all of our complete kits, it's important to understand that when we created these spring kits, we created them with the expectation or the hope that folks would install all the springs, not just pick one here and pick one there, because that's really asking for trouble. These spring kits have been put together to help you stay away from combinations in springs in the high power pistol that lead to the types of malfunctions that we talked about today. The BHSpringSolutions Advanced Match Grade High Power Barrel, both a standard crown and 11-degree crown. These were moved up in our plans for the future advancements for the high power pistol design. They were moved up because primarily the needs of the TISAS Regent BR9 owners, and because this particular barrel design has been improved and is, well, it's just not prone to fracture in this area like the old design high power pistol barrels were. So that was another reason, is because there was a need for the product. The BHSpringSolutions cartridge presentation angle magazine gauge tool. This is going to tell you, if nothing else, it's going to tell you which of my magazines should I be using for carry and relying on, and which ones should I be trying to make adjustments to, which high power magazines to a point are adjustable. And of course, we have the full range of Metgar high power magazines at BHSpringSolutions.com. Folks, thanks for watching. This has been a ton of information, and we appreciate you very much. Thank you. Mark Allen, BH Spring Solutions LLC, and BHSpringSolutions.com.